Day 836 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 518,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,270 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 26 tanks, 26 APVs, and a whopping 60 artillery, plus 2 MLRS systems and 2 air defense systems to boot. Then we'll head directly to the map now, as it was just revealed that Russia's Su-57 stealth jet, its most advanced jet, fell victim to a Ukrainian drone attack on the night of June 7th leading into June 8th in the little-known oblast of Astrakhan, located 600 kilometers from the front lines. Satellite images published by the main Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine shows 2 traces of drone strikes directly next to the Su-57. However, the extent of the damage is not yet completely clear, although a Russian Air Force adjacent telegrammer confirmed that Ukrainian drones successfully hit and damaged the jet, stating, quote, "The Su-57 was damaged by shrapnel. It is now being determined whether it can be restored or not." Now, as for the impact of this event, well, Russia has about 18 of these, mostly prototypes, with 6 or so having limited operation capability. Also, for the jet, there's been a number of challenges in production of these aircraft, including costs, technical limitations from economic sanctions, and issues with engines and structural components. Also, due to their operational limitations, they've never been used in Ukraine. Unless you count that one time that one of these jets flew to the edge of the Donbass escorted by 2 Su-35s as a propaganda piece, about 6 months ago. But nonetheless, the event is certainly looking like a win for Ukraine and therefore a real morale blow to Russia. Then also on the map, and not too far from here, yesterday after a daring strike, Ukrainian drones reportedly targeted the Mozdok airbase in the North Ossetia Republic of Russia. So the strategic airfield, located 730 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, houses certain Russian aviation assets, including the Tupolev Tu-22 strategic strike aircraft and the MiG-31K fighter jets. Now, as for this latest event, while the Russian Defense Ministry acknowledged downing a solitary Ukrainian drone by air defenses in the region, the somewhat more autonomous republic's head claimed a more audacious attack, asserting that 3 drones had been shot down over the town of the region of Mozdok itself. The Republic's head also stated that the airbase was the intended target, though he maintained that only minor damage occurred. And so, as for the distance travelled, at bare minimum, 730 kilometers through multiple federal subjects of Russia's, including oblasts, krais, republics, and not to mention the occupied territories where these drones may have travelled through, unless taking more of a Black Sea route, continues to put on display Russia's increasingly unprotected airspace. Then finally within Russia, and not more than a couple of hours ago now, a ammunition depot was hit in Belgorod. Although not a lot of updates as yet, as to whether this was from Western arms targeting near the border or somewhere further out from the border locations that Ukraine can explicitly hit with Western arms and instead somewhere a bit further north. Then we'll head across to Ukraine's northeastern sector, as it has now reached almost precisely a month into Russia's much-hyped northern Kharkiv offensive, with the results being underwhelming at best and a strategic defeat at worst. But what started as a relatively fast Russian advance spearheaded towards the key target of Vovchansk has now been bogged down completely in military engagements. But nonetheless, the event is certainly looking like a win for Ukraine and therefore a real morale blow to Russia. And despite Russia's very much advertised numerical superiority in troops and artillery, and with the ability to strike from Russian soil with impunity initially, the Russian incursion hit a wall on May 18th. Thus, the Russian dream of advancing close enough to shell Kharkiv city itself by the use of tubed artillery now looks like more of a pipe dream than it previously did. But the strategic implications are perhaps more damaging for Moscow. because not only have their offensives in Kharkiv and the east largely failed despite overwhelming resource advantages, the West's move to allow Ukrainian use of Western arms on Russian military sites across the border has exposed Russia's vulnerability and habit of hollow threats. Also, for these engagements, what was meant to be a diversion for the struggling Donbass offensive has proven equally fruitless for Russia so far, given that during this last month, Russian forces have not yet made any decisive advance into Chasiv Yar for a capture of the strategic town, with the exclusion of the Chasiv Yar micro-district in the east. But then also efforts on the Avdiivka axis slowed down quite notably as well. In short, 1 month of intensive fighting has showcased Russia's lacking ability to achieve even modest gains to date, and certainly in stark contrast to the manpower and materiel invested. And then, so to add to all of that, in a defiant evening address last night from President Zelensky, he went as far as to declare Russia's recent offensive in the Kharkiv Oblast as a failure. This announcement followed a strategic meeting with Ukrainian Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky, reflecting a significant blow to Moscow's military ambitions in the region. And while Russia controls a handful of villages near Vovchansk and Lipsy, the cost has been dear, with Ukrainian forces inflicting heavy losses on their units. Then headed across on the map to the above-mentioned Chasiv Yar front, and specifically to the aforementioned micro-district east of the canal, Russian forces have increased their presence in this part of the region, with fierce but limited urban fighting engagements still ongoing. And to give further insight into this location, and many locations just like it for that matter, foreign mercenaries fighting within the Russian army, like that of some Chinese contractors, in their exposure to the front lines have stated that Russians are stubborn in that they keep pushing by any means, despite the high number of casualties they face. And they've stated that the fighting continues relentlessly, showcasing a complete disregard for human life of the Russian forces. And so this one such mercenary from China stated that the situation was brutal, and it wasn't what he expected, with him instead expecting occasional skirmishes from a distance. And now he's sending out the word, saying that he wishes for no Chinese nationals to come to this war and fight for Russia. And he also stated a couple of other things of note as well, including as soon as a Russian tank hits the fields, into the front lines, they get targeted with Ukrainian drones straight away. He also mentioned that the Russian soldiers, they're actually not that very well trained at all. And he also mentioned that for the Russian frontline offensives, the Russian army sends in meat wave attacks first, or should I say infantry wave attacks, and that the humans go in before the vehicles. Then he goes on to strongly suggest that the way he sees it, that the Russian military values vehicles over human life. Shocking, but not unexpected. Then taking a look around the map, because somewhere in the east we saw the destruction of an OSA air defense system, a Russian one here, which was at first rolling around the area, then moved to undercover quarters in the hope of added safety. But then, with the AFU still being aware of its location, sent in 3 FPV drones to eliminate the system. Now, the OSA air defense system is a low-altitude, short-range tactical surface-to-air missile system, and one of the oldest air defense systems deployed in Ukraine by Russia, round about 1960s vintage. Then elsewhere in the east, we saw one such Ukrainian drone operating unit take out 3 Mr. B howitzers. These are the 152mm towed howitzer artillery pieces, which is a very important instrument for which Russia wages its war with. Then we saw, for instance, the repelling of yet another Russian mechanized attack in the Donetsk region. Several pieces of heavy equipment were hit and destroyed. Then in the east, we saw some of Russia's latest implemented battlefield methodologies, with numerous Russian soldiers on their motorbikes trying to storm Ukrainian positions, but were incredibly unsuccessful in doing so. There's just no protection afforded on these bikes. Then headed across to some news for today. So the Netherlands and Denmark will jointly contribute 400 million euros to a Swedish fund aimed at constructing CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles for Ukraine, as announced by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. So the CV-90s, known for their advanced armor and versatility, will bolster Ukraine's ground forces, enhancing their ability to defend against Russian aggression. A total of 230 of the CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles will be produced. Then in some other news, French defense giant Thales is set to supply Ukraine with a second air defense system under a contract arranged by the French Ministry of the Armed Forces. This advanced short-range system, known as the Force Shield, features the Control Master 200, which includes the Ground Master 200 air surveillance radar. It also incorporates a sophisticated radio communication system and the Control View Air Defense Command and Control Center, complete with portable weapon allocation terminals. That is, the launchers. So additions like these always aid in the enhancement of Ukraine's defensive capabilities, providing robust air surveillance and effective command and control functions to counter aerial threats. And it really does appear that Ukraine's air defensive capabilities, well, the gap is really widening between Ukraine and Russia, where we see Russia, almost every day now, is dealing with significant failures to protect its own airspace. Then in some other news, the Netherlands and Germany are set to establish a joint European production line for Patriot missiles. According to a report by Dutch public broadcaster NOS, the production line will be located in Germany and has received approval from the US, and so this collaborative effort aims to bolster European defense capabilities and streamline the production of these advanced weapons, ensuring a steady supply to meet the increase in demand for missile supplies in Ukraine, but also just the larger Europe as well. Then headed across to a Russian hardware update, as well, not all motorbikes are created equal, like this latest contraption, which, given its design, is difficult to understand exactly what we're even looking at here. But it didn't take long for this slow-paced monstrosity to be sighted and intercepted. And it was going so slow as well. I bet it was performing some low-volume ammunition resupply for Russian units not far away. Then headed across to some Russian economy-related news, as Igor Lipsitz, a prominent Russian economist, gave his 2 cents on the dire economic situation for Russia, calling it horrifyingly interesting, but also terribly fascinating. So he goes on to mention about Russia's demographic decline and its decrease in population. He also stated that no country in the world can thrive without international cooperation, and that Russia is headed towards turning into the hermit state that is North Korea. Now, one of your first thoughts might fairly be that this guy has to watch out for a window or some Novichok tea, but in fact, Igor resides outside of Russia, leaving the higher school of economics in Moscow, and has ever since been vocal about his opposition to the Kremlin's actions, particularly to the invasion of Ukraine. He also joins a significant number of Russian academics who have left the country due to the political climate and academic repression. Then on that note, because as for a perfect follow-up news piece, as at the recent St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, President Vladimir Putin boldly proclaimed that within 6 years, Russia will become one of the top 10 global leaders in scientific research and development. Now, of course, this optimistic target contrasts sharply with Russia's current situation, which overlooks the stark reality that the country faces, given, for instance, what's called brain drain, where Russian academics leave the country just in droves for a better life using their skills abroad. And yet, Russia makes these types of sensationalist claims all the time, attempting to somehow showcase Russia's future achievements that are never realized. A great example of this is, since 2007, according to Putin, Russia was to become one of the 5 largest economies in the world. But as you can see, he kept pushing that goalpost back, and would probably state, if asked, that those previous goals never existed. Now here's the thing, Putin's been in power for a quarter of a century now. So I think it's time for him to take at least some accountability for the shortfalls of Russian society. But I won't hold my breath on that one. Then also at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, as part of a Putin stand-up comedy hour, when he was responding to questions and answers from a panel segment, he somehow found the audacity to state that Moscow has never been the first to resort to aggressive nuclear rhetoric, and emphasized that it was the West who raised the topic first. Although, obviously, he didn't follow through on that statement to specify who exactly in the West was the one to start such aggressive rhetoric. And as for this latest forum, I must also quickly add, what would a 2024 Russian Economic Forum be without the attendance of the Taliban? That's right. as a delegation from the Taliban has also participated in the forum. I might just forego any comments on that one. Then headed across to a quick political funny to round it all off for today, guys. So Kremlin spokesperson Peskov, you know the guy, has come out to clarify Russia's red line for Ukraine, stating that the red lines were crossed not because of Ukraine's desire to be associated with the EU, but instead because of its transformation into becoming anti-Russian. Which is really just the latest in a series of excuses Russia gives for invading Ukraine, although on this particular point, it was the actual invading of Ukraine that may likely have transformed Ukraine into becoming anti-Russian, if anything. I'm happy to venture a guess there on that one. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment, subscribe if not already. That really helps boost out the channel as always, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!